we're starting off with this one, Pagan Christ. Now, I don't really see, other than Faith in the back, anyone that's sort of an undergraduate age. But let me just tell you, this topic here is something that most high school, college students are going to be familiar with, even if they don't know how to name it. Because this is an idea that, I'll explain what it is in a moment, but this particular idea that Jesus has some association with pagan religion is very current and gets a huge number of views on YouTube. There are lots of websites devoted to it. This is something that if you spend any time online, especially again with unvetted information, which that's pretty much what the internet is, just a hodgepodge of information, some wonderful stuff, seeded in the midst of a lot of garbage, you're going to run into this. And so most of the younger generation, they will have been exposed to this and wonder about it. And specifically, the technical term for this is Jesus mythicism. And there's really a twofold thesis to it. One is that there's absolutely no evidence that Jesus of Nazareth ever lived. Okay, that's item number one. Item number two is that what we think of as Christianity, and really oriented to the person of Jesus, who he was, what he did, all of that comes from pagan religions, basically a repurposing of certain elements of pagan religions, so that what you think of as Christianity and this person of Jesus is actually a mythical construct of, really an eclectic choosing of ideas from certain pagan religions and then just sort of mashed together to come up with this figure. So the Jesus mythicist doesn't believe Jesus existed, but believes Jesus is alive and well in the minds of millions, and he's just a misunderstood mythical amalgamation of pagan ideas. That's all he is. Now this approach, you can see, we'll start off with this one here. You will find this in print. Very few people who could actually call themselves scholars by the Jesus mythicist view. Tom Harper is sort of an academic. I mean, I only know of one really credentialed New Testament scholar, but he's, I don't know, I don't want to be pejorative, but he says some other crazy stuff in other areas that make you wonder if he's not one brick short of a load, kind of thing. But he does have credentials. But these are if you're going to look for sources on the web, these are probably your three go-to sources for the Jesus mythicist idea. Tom Harper's book, The Pagan Christ. This one is a sort of a semi-popular, tries to be academic book by Timothy Freak and Peter Gandy. And this one over here has a very strong web presence. Akaria S is a pseudonym. This is a woman author. Her last name is actually Murdoch. The Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold. And you will see, if you just Google like Jesus mythicist or Jesus myth or Jesus didn't exist, I guarantee this name will come up. Has a very strong presence online. It has been most popularized to students, to the younger generation, through this film. Zeitgeist, the movies, an independent film. Zeitgeist is actually sort of a hodgepodge. This is from Wikipedia. It really blends a number of skeptical and conspiratorial ideas. And one of the segments of the film is about the historicity of Jesus, and it puts forth the Christ myth theory, Jesus mythicism. So Zeitgeist, again, has been viewed millions and millions of times online. It's free. So that was part of the strategy. Make the movie, put it out there, and people will watch it. It goes up on YouTube, and it's had a very wide influence. But it throws in all this other stuff. 9/11 conspiracies, New World Order stuff. So, for many people, it's easy to look at the zeitgeist, and if they sort of learn a little bit about it, they just dismiss it. But the thing that it's actually really known for is the Jesus myth idea, that component of the film. Now, let's just take the two fundamental theses one at a time. First one, there's no evidence that Jesus ever lived. I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time on this because this has been sort of beaten senseless. Both of these books are by atheists, and they're not buying it. Okay, so even atheists, and these are scholars. Maurice Casey just passed away recently. He was a New Testament scholar, and so is Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is still alive. He teaches in North Carolina. They are very well known in biblical studies, biblical scholarship. And Casey's book very specifically targets the whole zeitgeist Jesus myth idea. It basically says, look, I don't believe anything about Jesus. I don't believe in God or anything like that, but it's absurd to say that he never lived. And it's also absurd to say that what Christianity puts forth is just a hodgepodge of pagan ideas. He says it's ridiculous. And so he goes through and debunks some of the books I showed you in the previous slide and lots of others. He's very familiar with the online community that promotes Jesus mythicism. And he goes through them one at a time. It's an academic book. It can be a dense read, a little hard read for the person who sort of doesn't speak the language of the academy, but it's quite good. Bart Ehrman, again, famous for being the evangelical turned atheist, says the same thing. It's just crazy to think that Jesus never lived. And so he actually wrote a book against it. And he took a lot of heat for it from the Jesus mythicist community, because since he is an atheist and a high profile one, doing the Colbert Report and all these late night talk shows, they thought he was their friend. I mean, they basically quickly turned against him when he said, you folks are just, out to lunch on this one. You don't have to believe anything about Jesus. I don't, but the idea that he never lived is just nonsense. A couple more. Marcus Borg, Dominic Crossan, very famous figures in New Testament scholarship. And they've not put forth books aimed at debunking the idea, because these books precede zeitgeist. But they do put forth good material that establishes the historicity of the figure. So again, if you're looking for, you run into this and you're looking for ammunition, one of the first things that someone who wants to promote this idea is going to say, oh, you're just doing that church stuff. You're giving me resources from pastors and the evangelicals and people who are confessional. No, not really. I just showed you 4 books by people who don't believe in the deity of Christ or God at all, that are opposed to the Jesus mythicist view. So you don't need to depend on evangelical sources. There are, of course, evangelical sources. The one on the left here by Eddy and Boyd, The Jesus Legend, is an attempt to, again, systematically go through Jesus mythicism, point by point, and address those things in an academic way. Gary Habermas from Liberty University, this is a more popular title, but he has become known for sort of one of the go-to guys for discussing the evidence outside the Bible, outside the New Testament, for Jesus of Nazareth. So this one's a little bit more readable, but Rhodes and Eddy, it's a good academic book, and they're both good writers, and they communicate pretty well. Craig Evans, again, he has a chapter in this book on Jesus mythicism, so it's not the whole book. This one on the right here is a small paperback. I think its weakness is that it shows a few of the signs of being put together kind of in a hurry. It was a response book to Zeitgeist by Corder and Bedard, but it still has a lot of good material in it as well. So I would recommend that. And so it's less than 200 pages. So if you wanted to sort of get up to speed on what the arguments are and responses, that would be a good choice. So we're going to spend most of our time on number 2. Virtually all the details of the life and teachings of Jesus are somehow coming from pagan religion. And I'm going to focus on Egyptian material, and the Mithras, or what Mithras is the central figure, one of the Greco-Roman mystery religions. So as far as similarities, what you're going to see is, yeah, there are similarities between the basic ideas of Christianity and some pagan religions. But even when there are similarities, when you drill down a little bit into the similarities, you're going to see that the two entities, Christianity and this other one over here, they're really using terms in different ways. And there are some fundamental differences even when the similarities are struck. And the reason you have any similarities at all is pretty self-explanatory. The ancient world, again, they're predisposed to supernaturalism. So that's it from the get-go. And, that means their thoughts about creation, life, death, any sort of anomalous experience, they're going to be explained in supernatural terms. And every religion, again, is concerned with life, death, rebirth, afterlife. I mean, this is what they're all about. Every one of them. But they articulate, again, beliefs about the afterlife or beliefs about salvation in widely different ways. But since the concerns are the same, you're naturally going to get, ideas about those things that are going to have some points of overlap. There's also the issue of geographical proximity. I mean, this is the Mediterranean. They're not cut off from each other. And so you're going to have, Christians moving pagans and pagans moving Christians. And paganism can break down into, a few dozen different sorts of belief systems or cults or whatever. But they run into each other all the time. So there's just invariably going to be some sort of, cross-stimulation discussion, a comparison of ideas. And when people write, and this is a prehistoric times, there's a lot of writing going on, there's going to be some notes, some record of how all these different groups talk about the same set of issues. And you're going to have points of overlap. And the last one, I think, this is the one that Zeitgeist really likes to hop on, is the fact that historically, the early Roman Church, what we would call Roman Catholic today, one of their strategies for evangelism, for conversion, for spreading the influence of Christianity, that brand of Christianity, was literally to strike parallels in, whatever geographical area, whatever culture, was to strike parallels with what they had believed up to that point, again, what we would think of as pagan religion, and say, oh, well, this character over here, that's just like, Mary, or that's just like Jesus. And the similarities would be reflected in their artwork, their iconography. And so it creates this impression, because it's a deliberate strategy, that there's a similarity. And again, there may be some points of similarity, but you have to realize what the Jesus Mythicist crowd is saying. They're saying that those pagan antecedents are the cause, and Christianity is the effect of that cause. That Christianity actually literally derives from those things. That it's not just, Roman Catholic, priests or whatever, drawing analogies, again, for the sake of getting people to convert from this God to this God. They're saying that we wouldn't even have the discussion about Christianity had it not been for these pagan religions, because that's really where it comes from. So, first one, Christian Jesus is really the Egyptian Osiris and Horus. Zeitgeist and other sources will say, well, look, Horus was conceived by a virgin, Isis, and Osiris was killed and resurrected. There you go. That's Jesus. Jesus is just this, again, amalgam of Egyptian religion and these particular gods. On the left is Osiris, all right, it's Isis. Osiris is green, by the way, typically because he's Lord of the Dead. We're going to talk about Osiris's resurrection in a moment. Here we had Horus, again, wearing the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Horus was a major pharaoh figure. We'll talk about a little bit why. But Zeitgeist will zero in on things like this. This is Isis nursing her son Horus. And of course, we have Mary with Jesus. Because they say, look, it's the same thing. That one derives from the other. One is the cause, the other is the effect. Now, if you're not familiar with the Osiris, Isis, Horus myth, here's a little bit of a summary. So the god Osiris was married to his sister wife, Isis, who was also a goddess. Osiris was very popular because he taught people how to farm, and he just sort of rose to the top in terms of noteworthy deities in Egyptology, Egyptian religion. His brother Seth was very jealous, so Seth devised a plan to kill Osiris by trapping him in a coffin and sending it off into the Nile. He was successful, but he didn't anticipate that Isis would go looking for her husband, Osiris, which she did. The coffin drifted to the country of Byblos and rested by a tree that over the years completely overgrew the coffin, and so the coffin was sort of encased in this tree. The tree was later cut down and used as a pillar in a nearby palace with the coffin still inside. When Isis discovered where the coffin was, she retrieved it and attempted to revive Osiris. During her attempts, Seth heard that the pillar coffin had been discovered. He got it, cut it up into 14 pieces, and scattered it throughout the Nile River. So he wants to make sure this time that he's done away with Osiris. Isis, though, didn't give up. She searched for the pieces, recovered 13 or 14. The missing one in some versions of the story is Osiris's penis, which was sadly eaten by a fish. Still, Isis brought Osiris back to life with the pieces she found and conceived their first child, Horus, either by magic or copulation, depending on the version. Now, some of the other versions will have Isis saying, I found 13 or 14, but the one that's really important here is missing. So she goes to Thoth, which was the Egyptian god of wisdom, and he fashions a penis of gold for the reassembled Osiris. And Isis brings him back to life, and they have sex, and the product of that is Horus. Now, so just look at the story. Isis is not a sexual virgin when she conceived Horus. Egyptian texts never claimed that. They never refer to Isis as a virgin. So that's disconnect number one. Again, that Zeitgeist isn't going to tell you about. Horus, obviously, in the story, in all the versions, was the result of sexual intercourse between Isis and Osiris. Again, either because she found the penis in some versions, or if she didn't, he has one created for him. But somehow Isis brings him back to life, they have sex, and the result is Horus. And it's very clear that Horus is not virgin born the way Christianity has. A, Isis isn't a virgin because she was married to Osiris before, and B, Horus is clearly the result of a sexual union. So there were some real fundamental disconnects. Now, after Osiris is, raised or reanimated, he becomes god of the underworld. Now, you can think about the underworld. I realize Egyptian religion can seem kind of bizarre, but we actually have some of the same thoughts ourselves. People die, but yet they're not really dead. They're living in the afterlife somewhere. Okay? Either heaven, hell, or some intermediate state. And that's why when you have Osiris here, he's alive, but now he's in the underworld, living sort of a cadaverous existence or something like that. But that's where he is. Osiris was not allowed to return to the land of the living. Okay, this is precisely the point of the Christian resurrection. So the Egyptian story doesn't even have that element, and in fact specifically denies it. So how Zeitgeist can use this and say, this is just like the Christian resurrection. I'll have to be honest with you. Sometimes I think this is just pure ignorance on their part, but I also think there's malice going on here. I just think that they're going to lie to you. They're just going to lie, because who's going to bother to check? Horus, eventually in the Egyptian story, became a god king, and the pharaoh, every succeeding pharaoh, at least if they were natural-born Egyptian, foreign pharaohs, depended on what they wanted their people to believe. But Egyptian pharaohs were the reincarnation of Horus. That was why Pharaoh was considered a god. But Horus becomes the god king, and then he gives up his throne in the Egyptian story and replaces him with a human being, the pharaoh. So each succeeding pharaoh is the reincarnation of Horus. Now, there's a New Testament scholar. I wanted to throw this up here just because, I will give my files, my slides to Will, or post them somewhere so you can get them. But there's a link here. Lord Gask is a New Testament scholar, and he's one of the few actually in the evangelical orbit. I mean, I've shown you a couple of the response books, but that's about all there is. He took the zeitgeist pretty seriously, and he said, you know what, I need to, do a fairly serious job of debunking this. And so what he did was, on this site, he talks about, Tom Harper, one of the books I showed you, his views, and what Harper claims. According to Harper, there's no evidence that Jesus of Nazareth ever lived. It's basically all Egyptian religious ideas. Harper never quotes any contemporary Egyptologist or recognized academic authority or world religions for his claims. So Gask said, I'm going to go ask some. And I'm going to go ask who this guy is. Harper, he found out he's really entirely dependent on, look at the dates here. 1880, 1963, 18th, 19th century, 19th century, authorities or writers is probably a better way to say it, of more than a century ago. These are Harper's sources to this whole idea. And one of them that Harper, calls one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, great Egyptologist, was a high school language teacher who was a theosophist. He had no credentials in the field at all. Okay, so Harper's sources are very suspect. But anyway, what Gask does is he said, look, I'm not an Egyptologist, so I'm going to go ask something. He sends an email to 20 leading Egyptologists, and what does he find out? He wants to find out answers to specifics. So these are all from Harper's book. That the name of Jesus was derived from the Egyptian Yusa, and that's how you, by the way, nobody knows how Egyptian was pronounced. This is just scholarly conventions. You put E's before the consonants or I's, and you just go with it. Musa, which means the coming divine son who heals or saves. This is Harper's claim. See, that's Jesus. It's right out of Egyptian stuff. Harper claims the god Horus is an Egyptian Christos, or Christ, and his mother Isis again, forerunner of the Madonna and the child. It said, this was a leading image in Egyptian religion. Other claims. Horus had a virgin birth. He claims that he was a fisher of men and had 12 followers. So again, if you're reading Harper's book or you're listening to any of this on Zeitgeist, you're going, what do I do now? Look at that. This is impossible. I mean, Jesus has to be derived from this stuff. Look at all these parallels. The letters KRST appearing on Egyptian mummy coffins many centuries BC. I love when they don't give you exact dates, so you can't actually track anything down. This word, where the vowels are filled in, is really Charos or Christ, signifying Christ. And then the doctrine of the Incarnation is, in fact, the oldest, most universal mythos known in religion. This is all Osiris stuff. Basically, all this is garbage. Only one of 10 experts who responded to Gask's questions had ever heard of any of his sources. The responding scholars were unanimous in dismissing the suggested etymologies for Jesus and Christ. I mean, I've taken hieroglyphs, and it's nonsense. I mean, it just is. Rod Leprehan, who is the professor of Egyptology at Toronto, pointed out that Sa means son. Remember, Yusa was Harper's arm, but for Jesus. Sa does mean son. And you does mean to come, but the Kuhn Harper had the syntax all wrong. Basically, the word order is wrong in Egyptian. In any event, this combination never exists in Egyptian literature. It's a fabrication. While all recognize, again, Gask's the people he emailed, while all recognize that the image of the baby Horus and Isis has influenced the Christian iconography, again, because this was a strategy in the early church to create these congruences. There's no evidence for the idea that Horus was virgin born. We already talked about that. There's no evidence that the idea that Horus was a fisher of men. It never occurs in Egyptian literature about Horus. He's never called a fisher of men. He's never said to have 12 followers. He's literally making it up. And his sources make it up. And then they just make a movie about it, put it on YouTube, and it gets millions of followers. That's how it works. KRST is the word for burial or coffin. Coffin is KRSW. But again, there's no etymological evidence to link this with Christos or Hebrew Mashiach. This is actually the key term here because it's Semitic. Now, Egyptian is not a Semitic language. It's classified as Hamito-Semitic, African Semitic. It has some Semitic characteristics and some other things that are not, but it ain't Greek. The Greek is Indo-European. It's nowhere close. So if you'd expect the correlation, this is where you would find it with a culture that's near, okay, not across the the Mediterranean Sea up in the Aegean somewhere. You'd expect Egypt, next door neighbors to Canaan, that there would be a correlation there, but there isn't anything. Again, they're just making it up. Acaria S. We'll switch gears to Mithra here. And Acaria S is the one that has sort of a web popularized this the most. She quotes Gerald Very, Religions of the World. She has this in one of her books. Both Mithras and Christ were described variously as the way, the truth, the light, the life, the word of the Son of God, the Good Shepherd. The Christian litany to Jesus can easily be an allegorical litany to the sun god. Mithras is often represented as carrying a lamb on his shoulders, just as Jesus is. By the way, where's the verse for that? That's in Christian bookstore art. Okay, that's not in the New Testament. Midnight services were found in both religions. Ooh, there's a tight parallel. Midnight services. The Virgin Mother was easily merged with the Virgin Mother Mary. Petra, the sacred rock of Mithraism, became key to the foundation of the Christian Church. Again, this is basically all made up. So let's talk about it. The parallels. Some of this can be summarized here with this article right here, as far as the main tenets. The argument goes this way: Mithras preceded Christianity by roughly 600 years. So this Mithra religion was around supposedly 600 years before Christianity. Mithras, it is said, was born on December 25th. He was considered a great teacher, 12 disciples, performed miracles, called the Good Shepherd, the way, truth, light, all this stuff. Identified with the lion and the lamb. And followers were marked with the sign of the cross. Mithras had a Eucharist or a Lord's Supper that had bread and wine. The initiation ceremonies included a baptism to remove sins. Again, if you're just reading this, or you're watching it in Zeitgeist, you're like, it takes your breath away. You're like, oh man, look at all these parallels. All right, let's go through them. The Roman deity Mithras appears in the historical record in the late 1st century AE for the first time. In other words, that coincides with the era of the early church, toward right around the 100. Let's just use around. No, it's 100 AD. So Mithras, is contemporary, but it's not older. It could very well be a response to Christianity or a counter religion with Christianity. To say Christianity came from it is, again, you don't have the chronology for it. Now, mythicists, when they have an occasional spasm of honesty, overcome this by saying Mithras is actually the Persian Zoroastrian deity Mitra. Unlike major Greco-Roman deities like Jupiter, no ancient source preserves the mythology of Mithras. We're going to come back to this Mitra claim in a moment. But here's a key idea that they never tell you. There are no Mithras texts. So where do we get this 12 followers carrying the lamb? The way, the truth, and the light. Where do we get that? It ain't from primary sources. There are no Mithra texts. What the best you get is when archaeologists uncover what's called a Mithraeum, which is where Mithras followers would meet. You might have short 1 or 2 word inscriptions, but there are no texts. There's no like Mithras Bible or anything like that. It doesn't exist. All information about Mithras comes from depictions on monuments and again a handful of comments about the cult from other sources, people writing about the followers of Mithras. But they didn't produce their own material. Why? It was a mystery religion. It's supposed to be secret. It's kind of like the Freemasons, the whole mythology about the Freemasons, where, we're not, what we do is a secret, so we're not writing it down so people can't discover. Well, that's what you have with mystery religions in the ancient world. They didn't write things down because that's the whole point. Okay? It's supposed to have this secret development. The temples of Mithras were always in an underground in the cave or a Mithraic. These temples regularly feature iconography. This is a very familiar image in all of them. This is Mithras killing the bull, which was a ritual or ceremony known as the tauroctony. We'll come back to that in a moment. Here's a Mithraic that's been excavated. Modern study of Mithras actually begins just before 1900. Okay, so here we have, once again, the 19th century, with Franz Cumald's text et monument, 2-volume work that at his time, dating 1900, collected all the ancient evidence about Mithras known at the time. Okay, so he made an effort to collect everything. Now, Cumald assumed, keyword, we know what happens when we assume things, that Mithras was merely the Roman form of the ancient Indo-Persian deity Mitra or Mithra. He just thought, well, it sounds right, so that must be the case. In the mid-1950s, Cumald's pupil, Vermaseren, published a new collection of monuments, new discoveries, and these are links to those materials, which added the archaeological discoveries of the last 50 years, but also highlighted how poorly the archaeology supported Cumald's theory, his own mentor. The 1971 International Conference on Mithraic Studies, Cumald's theory was abandoned officially in favor of a Roman origin for the cult, and Vermaseren himself rejected his mentor's theory in 1975. Basically, he debunked his own mentor. Mithras did not precede Christianity by roughly 600 years. Okay. There is no, according to Vermaseren's work, Vermaseren tried to establish a connection between Mithras and Mitra from Persian Zoroastrianism and said, I can't find anything. There is no connection between the two. And that was a linchpin to Cumald's theory. And it was one of the leading reasons why it was abandoned. Because we can't say certain things about Mithras because they left us no texts. A lot of what they were saying about the Mithras religion was imported from Zoroastrian thinking. And without that connection, it's just a vacuum. And so they abandoned her. And anyone who's really a Mithras scholar knows this. Akaria S. is not a Mithras scholar. Hey, Tom Harper is not a Mithras scholar. You want to know about Mithras, you go to the Mithras experts. And people who actually do the work. And they're saying it's nonsense. What about December 25th? Mithras and the Roman sun god Sol Invictus, the victorious sun, are co-identified in inscriptions on candles. So there is a connection between Mithras and Sol Invictus. Other inscriptions distinguish them, but there are some who identify them. In AD 274, this is well after Christian origins, Emperor Aurelian gave the cult of Sol Invictus official status alongside the other traditional cults of the empire. And according to the text chronology of 354, the birth of Sol Invictus was celebrated on December 25th. This is how you get a Mithras birth date for December 25th, the connection to Sol Invictus. So, okay, let's just say Mithras, December 25th. Well, that's nice. And Christmas wasn't in December for the first 300 years of the church's history. By the way, Jesus wasn't born on December 23rd. Okay, there's that little thing. Oh, what a shocker, yeah. But even in the early church, they didn't think that. They didn't even celebrate Christmas, the birth of the Savior in December. Some church fathers argued against celebrating the birth of Jesus at all. Origen was one of those. He said birthdays of gods were for pagans. So he actually opposed any sort of celebration. If, though, early Christians observed it at all, again, in the first 300 years, the celebration of Christ's birth was usually part of the Feast of Epiphany, which was of January 6th. Eventually, church authorities did settle on December 25th as the birth of Jesus, knowing that it coincided with existing pagan festivals honoring Saturn and Mithra by that time. So again, it was part of the strategy. We're going to link Jesus to familiar things for pagans in the hope that the pagans will say, oh, well, look, Jesus is really our God too, so let's worship him and join the Christian church. It was an evangelistic strategy. It sounds kind of odd to us, but that's what they were thinking. That's the way you move people over. You create familiar connections and then you move them over to Christianity. This is how Christianity becomes the official religion all over ancient Europe. So in that sense, it sort of worked, but theologically, it's a mess. But like, who's caring about theology? That's just for Rory people. The idea, again, was to convince pagan subjects to change allegiances. Western Christians celebrated Christmas on December 25th for the first time in 336, after Emperor Constantine had declared Christianity the empire's official religion. So you got a 300-year problem, essentially, if you're going to make the Mithras argument. Eastern churches, though, stuck with January 6th. That's one of the things that separates them. But again, there's no biblical evidence Jesus was born on any of these dates. Other claims. There's no evidence that Mithras was a historical person. Oops, we forgot about that one. Again, it appears in the historical record around 100 in the late 1st century. But the people in the mystery cults and their little inscriptions and the writers who are writing about Mithras, nobody ever claimed that Mithras was real. Again, isn't that a significant omission? Or I think that would matter a little bit. So the idea he had 12 disciples, that's a fabrication. He's not a real guy. He doesn't have 12 guys following him around, okay? The idea comes from the zodiac. Since Mithra was the sun, remember he's identified with Sol Invictus, the victorious sun. Therefore, well, the 12 signs of the zodiac, that's where the 12 disciples come from. See that? This is what you got. This is where these ideas come from. But again, if you're reading Harper's book and you just see this list of parallels, it's like breathtaking. But then when you really drill down into it, it's like, you gotta be kidding. This is where it comes from? Well, yeah. Jesus carrying a lamb on his shoulders. Again, there's no New Testament verse for that. Go to the Christian bookstore, look at some art, and look at it. Titles Good Shepherd, The Way, the Truth, all these, Savior, Messiah. Only the terms Redeemer and Savior can be verified as having any association with Mithras. And every pagan cult thought their deity was their savior, all that kind of stuff. However, worshippers of Mithras did not use the terms to actually describe him. They were used conceptually in regard to following Mithras. So you followed Mithras if you wanted to be saved or redeemed, but they didn't actually call him. Again, there's almost no written evidence anyway, but in what is there, they never actually call him these things, like Christians did with Jesus. Again, the nature of redemption and salvation of Mithraism was quite different than Christianity. The Lion of the Lamb, again, there's basically no evidence for the Lamb association and Mithras. There does appear to be some connection between Mithras and a figure called Ion, a lion-headed man. This is also a Gnostic figure. This isn't the way lion symbolism is used in the Bible, though. Jesus is the Lion of Judah. But lion imagery is also used to describe the enemies of Christians. So, while, yeah, okay, there's a messianic connection to the tribe of Judah, whose symbol was a lion, that's really about all you get. And in the Bible, it's not always about Jesus. Sometimes it's about other things. Was the Lord's Supper or Eucharist taken over from Mithraism? And what this view does is it basically ignores everything in the Dead Sea Scrolls that has some relationship to the question of communion or Lord's Supper practices. Now, if Dead Sea Scrolls scholars aren't going to say that New Testament Lord's Supper practices came from Dead Sea Scrolls sects, what they will say is that there were people at Qumran, the Qumran community, who did similar things. They had bread and wine ceremonies, celebrate the Messiah, celebrate this or that. It's that there's a similarity there, but Jewish scholars, again, scholars of the Second Temple period Judaism, we're not going to say there was a cause and effect here, but there is a clear similarity. So why would you need to go to Mithras for this when you have Judaism right before the New Testament period and overlapping with the New Testament period doing these things? You don't need a pagan cult for that. Then frankly, again, we're in my podcast, we're going through the law of all things, Leviticus. So there are very clear parallels in the Old Testament. Bread, wine, and it's not like these were new elements to religious ritual or worship. And they used wine. They had the bread of the presence. Or, what's so hard about this? Unleavened bread for the Passover, the Last Supper. It was a Passover meal. This is what you used. Why do we need Mithras for this? Well, the answer is clearly you don't. But, that's what they want to do. Again, basically this teaching, this idea comes from Qumran's discredited assumptions and from comments by Justin Martyr. Here's what Justin Martyr writes, who was an early Christian apologist. Now notice what he actually says. He says, "For the apostles in the memoirs composed by them which are called Gospels have thus delivered unto us what was enjoined upon them, that Jesus took bread, that he had given thanks, said, This do in remembrance of me, this is my body. And after that, after the same manner, having taken the cup and given thanks, he said, This is my blood. And he gave it to them alone, which the wicked devils have imitated in the mysteries of Mithras." So what Justin Martyr actually says is the opposite of what Jesus Mithras want to say. He's accusing the Mithrists of copying the Christians, not the other way around. Again, it doesn't mean the Christians copied from Mithra. The Qumran evidence is clear, and the Old Testament precedent for Passover is clear. You just don't need this. So you can read the line and say the opposite of what Justin was talking about, but I guess anything goes. What about baptism? Again, many pagan religions have ritual washings. Such a theme, baptisms could have been taken directly from one of the esoteric Jewish sects. Again, Eliade is not a Christian. He's a very famous scholar of religion. And he's saying, look, Christian baptism could have had its origins in a number of places. And the logical place to look would be a Jewish sect, especially the Essenes, concerning whom the Dead Sea manuscripts have now added sensational to our knowledge. Indeed, it is not even necessary to suppose that an initiatory theme was borrowed from Christianity or by Christianity from some other religion. Or is it just, there's nothing here? Mithras sacrifice, this should be, it's a typo, a sacred bull to create life. Well, this is getting into what Mithra followers actually did. They had Mithras killing the bull and all the iconography. So what they did, they would kill a bull, and it was part of a ritual to create life, again, to reverse the effects of death, life, death, afterlife. The followers were baptized in the blood from the bull, but there's no reference to the atoning of sin. The atoning of sin through blood or Mithras atoning for sin. It wasn't why they were doing it. So again, it's a clear disconnect between what the followers of Mithras were doing in their mystery religion and what Christians are thinking. What about the sign of the cross? And if you want this source, we try to get it for you. Branding in the mysteries of Mithras. Mithras followers were branded. They did footmarks somewhere. But the authority on this subject says the idea that they were branded with the sign of a cross is a scholarly myth. There was just no evidence for it. There's also no reference to Mithras being virgin-born or visited by magi. Well, you'd think if the Christians need like source material from Mithras, that they would, this would be a port. Okay, but again, they don't. They're literally making it up. All known Mithras tradition has Mithra being born from a rock. Okay, all of the traditions about Mithras, stuff that's written about their religion, says he was born from a rock. Well, then how can the rock-Peter connection make any sense? Jesus wasn't born from a rock, and he wasn't born from Peter either. And it's just absurd. But again, I hope you're getting the point. You read these books, your young people watch the Zeitgeist video, and they go through this litany of parallels, and they're like blown away. All this stuff I hear in church is a fabrication. It comes from some cult, some Greco-Roman cult or Egyptian religion or whatever. And they're not going to take, obviously, the time divinely to go track this stuff down. They're not going to do that. I mean, they might dismiss it. They might believe it. They might never tell you. This is the kind of thing that I think would be very useful to go through in church, because I'm willing to bet that a lot of young people in your church have watched that video or heard about it, or come across something on the web after they heard about it. Now here's a picture of, it says Mithras iconography. He's being born from a rock. All the traditions agree here. The earliest existing account of Mithras' birth in iconography like this has him coming from a rock, and around the circle surrounding Mithras, here are like sheep and goats. Here's a guy over here. Well, is that a shepherd? Okay, well, maybe it is. Of course, if you're a car, yes, you're going to say it is. It's interesting, again, because according to this religion, Mithras was supposed to have been preceded, or he was supposed to have been born before the creation of humans. So how does this make any sense? Well, the answer is it doesn't. Hey, this isn't supposed to be, this isn't supposed to be fodder for, hey, when Mithras was born, look at all these things that are around there, okay? That isn't the point. But yet, Acaria S will take something like this and say, well, look, Mithras is being born, there are shepherds there, just like Jesus. And if you knew anything about Mithras, shepherds didn't exist at the time. So the point of this iconography is not to say shepherds were present when Mithras was born from a rock. Because in actual Mithras theology, all the sources we have are people writing about what these people believed. But in all those sources, the idea is that Mithras was born before there were any humans. And so these details, again, had something else in mind. I personally think, and I'm not the only one, if you look at some of the other ones in here, that the Mithras religion was very tied into astrology, okay, to the zodiac, that kind of thing. And so some of these symbols have easy correspondences to parts of the zodiac or constellations. So that's probably a better approach than saying there were humans before there were humans, that kind of thing, as it just doesn't make any sense. But again, they're not going to tell you that. There's also no reference to Mithras dying on a cross. I don't know how much time I have here. What time do you have? Or minutes? Time of help. You might wonder, okay, where does this image come from on Freak and Gandhi's book? Now, this actually isn't going to be Mithras, but again, they're going to talk about Mithras in here and might be misled. But where does this symbol come from? This is actually a seal, a little cylinder seal that it used to be in a museum in Berlin. It was lost shortly after World War II. And what you did with these seals, again, you rolled them on clay or some other soft surface, and that created an impression. So here's the seal, here's the impression it creates. It's actually the reverse of this. It is associated with Orpheus or Dionysus. You'll notice there's an inscription here, okay? Here's the inscription. Orpheus Bacchikos refers to the mythological Greek musician Orpheus and the Greek wine god Dionysus, whose Roman name was Bacchus. The seal is dated 2 to 300 AD. So again, it's well after the Christian era. So you would think, well, maybe this is a parody of Christianity in some way. Maybe they wanted to diss Christianity in some way. But no. Now, Acarius will tell you that Christianity came from this. Forget about the 200 or 300 year disconnect. The cross is actually not really a cross. If you look at it, with the point at the end, it's sort of an anchor shape. And if you magnify this, there are no nails in the feet or the hands. Because there are no other Christian symbols on it, all comparisons with Christianity are circular reasoning. You have to read them into it, because there are no actual Christian symbols on the thing. Orpheus was the son of a muse. Muses were goddesses with superhuman music skills. They joined the expedition of the Argonauts, which may have something to do with the anchor shape. Argonauts, ships, sea, big anchors. What a leap. Saving them from the music of the sirens, Orpheus saved the Argonauts from the sirens by playing his own music. Orpheus was killed by being torn apart by a band of women. Right? No, I'm sorry, he wasn't crucified. He was torn apart by a band of women. I like the Beatles. The mystery religion of Orpheus does go back to BC, but again, there's no crucifixion. It's not a crucifix, it's an anchor. And the inscription, again, it tells you what it is. Now, many scholars, though, consider the seal a hoax. You will find this in the literature, in part because Orpheus was not crucified. So what they're saying is, look, if it's not an anchor, let's just say it's a cross. That doesn't make any sense. So it leads us to believe that if someone was trying to make this argument, this might actually be a fake. There are scholars in the field of Orphic studies who think this thing is a fake. There's actually several of them. And the same for Dionysus. Dionysus was not crucified. There's no record that December 25th was ever significant for Orpheus or Dionysus. Dionysus was not virgin born. His parents were either, depending on the version of the mythology. Dionysus was either the son of Zeus and a mortal woman by direct copulation, or Zeus and the goddess Persephone. There's no virgin birth. There's Dionysus or Orpheus. Again, including failure. This is about the seal, the object. To this part of the inquiry belongs the mention of the curious and much discussed seal or amulet in Berlin. Again, it's no longer there, it was. The design on this seal, again, the figure, which I took from this quote, which is dated in the 3rd or 4th centuries AD, shows a crucified man. And we're making that assumption. Above the cross are a crescent moon and 7 stars, and the cross, and below it is the legend Orpheus Bacchus. This has usually been supposed to be the work of some Gnostic sect exhibiting a syncretism of Orphic and Christian ideas. Just as Christ is seen in Christian monuments, which attributes of Orpheus work in the reverse, and because of it, the strategy to create correlations with other gods. So here, by a tribute from the other side, Orpheus is representing the attitude of Christ, who Kern, who is the collector of the amulet, recanted and expressed himself convinced by the expert opinion of Ryle and Zahn that the Orpheus Bacchus gem is a forgery. So the guy who actually collected it originally came around to believe it was a fake. So even if it's not, you have a number of incongruences with it. So if you're into this, again, you'll get access to the slides. There are some really, I think, pretty good websites on other aspects of Zeitgeist that you can look up. And I would say for students, again, and anybody who has access to this library here, use the databases. Always insist on primary sources. This is what I do every time. I don't know if any of you have heard me on the radio, or because I do lots of interviews. I especially with crazy stuff like ancient astronaut theory. It's always the same. Show me the texts. Show me the primary sources. That is our starting point. I don't care if they said this. I want to know who they are. And usually that kills the conversation right there, because it's about peddling mythology. Yeah. I can't put it really any other way. When you go through the material and you realize these connections are so surface oriented, and some of them are just fabricated, and the ones that aren't fabricated are wrong in like 3 or 4 other different ways. It is just peddling an idea to do what? To destroy the church, to destroy somebody's faith, whatever. That's what it is. But you're only going to find that if you insist that someone show you the data. Like I said, it usually just kills the conversation. You get the data, then you start tracking things down.